Good morning. Welcome to the first session that we're talking about the prerequisite for the next 15 sessions. So each of the session approximately around 12 to 15 minutes. Okay, we want to make it short and more effective. And here in this first session, we're going to talk about what are the prerequisites for you to play around with containers and Kubernetes later. So in this session, we'll be taking you through how we can install Docker Toolbox. The reason being here is that when we did the DevOps, we could see that not everybody having the right prerequisite for the Docker. Okay, so there are certain prerequisites that is expected to have Docker native way of installation. But if you have the Docker already, please use the same. You can use the same, no problem. But in case if not all the prerequisites are met, you can actually use Docker Toolbox. So let's quickly see in this session about how to install Docker Toolbox. Basically, Docker Toolbox is again a flow by Docker. It's like when you do not have all the requirements for your desktop. Okay, this is not for the enterprise, but more to practice. You can actually have a community version that is running using a separate tool or collection of tools through Docker Toolbox. What you get when you install your Docker Toolbox, you will get an Oracle VirtualBox where you have the Docker engine running, and then you have something called Docker Machine. So Docker Machine is basically an orchestration which actually manages the host where the Docker engine is running. And you will also have the Docker Compose. We'll talk about Docker Compose towards managing multi-containers solutions, session number 12, if I remember well. Yep. You'll also get a Docker CLI. Yeah. So that's a very easy way to manage the Docker Toolbox. But before we install, we'll ask you to check a couple of things. Most of the laptop that we see, where when we go to the Task Manager and Performance, you can see something called virtualization. If it is not enabled, make sure that this is enabled, because this is important to have the virtualization enabled on your operating system to have the Docker Toolbox running. That's something that we're gonna look a little deeper how do we do this enablement. Something that we want to discuss deeply, like when you want to have Docker Toolbox, there are three things that we ask you to do. One, you make sure that you enable the virtualization at the BIOS level. By default, this will be disabled. Let it be Intel or AMD. This will be disabled by default, so you have to enable it. We'll talk about that. And in case if you have an existing virtualization software, could be Hyper-V or whatever, the recommended way to disable them, because if you have two virtualization software, there's a chance to have conflict, and sometimes your Oracle VM will not come online. And once these prerequisites are ready, you can actually download and install, which is very straightforward. So let's look at it. How do we enable the virtualization at the BIOS? To do so, you have to reboot your machine, and before the actual booting sequence starting, I mean the operating system, you have to press the appropriate key. Could be F2, it could be F10, that you need, or depends on your hardware. You need to go to the BIOS menu, and you have to identify where the virtualization that is disabled by default, and you need to enable it from the BIOS. We have a couple of screenshots that we can actually share you from AMD and Intel, which will give you more practical perspective. This is a sample screenshot from one of the Windows machine running on Intel hardware. So you have to reboot your machine, and you have to press F2 and F10, sorry, and then come to the BIOS menu. And in Intel, it's normally under Advanced. Again, depends on your hardware you can select. And if it's Intel, you can see something like Intel Virtualization Technology. It will be by default disabled. Click on the enable and toggle it to enable. And once you do that, press F10, save and exit. The system will reboot and start automatically with virtualization enabled. First, this is for AMD machine. Again, you have to reboot, come to the BIOS, go to the configuration, and make the virtualization technology as enable, save, and come up. bring up the operating system. So once you bring up the operating system, you can actually go to the task manager if you are running Windows 8 and above. Most of the people are in the version, and ensure that your virtualization in the enabled state. If it is not enabled, you really need to look at it, and maybe you have to repeat the step. Do not forget to save once you change the step in the BIOS, and make sure that it is enabled before we proceed further. There is another probability that if you have virtual software or another virtualization software that is running, it may also create a conflict, so please do disable it before proceeding further. I'm just showing you, like, in case if you have Hyper-V, you can actually go to the program accessories and disable the Hyper-V, or you can actually use the PowerShell and make it disabled. So it's an advisable comment that we need to focus, that you do not run two virtualization technologies. Right, so once that's been done, it's a very easy step for you, and you have very detailed documentation just for the different versions and what are the basic requirements, and whether the operating system is 64-bit or 32. Okay, because you need to run it on 64-bit, and that's the case for most of us. So on the same page, you have something called Toolbox releases. From the Toolbox releases, basically it will take you to github.com/docker/toolbox under releases. So this is where you actually reached, and from there you select your respective exe or package that you want to use it for your installation. So you download the exe for Windows. So I'm gonna use the same. You download the exe and launch the installation once the download is happened. Very simple procedure. You follow the wizard, and during the installation, it will also ask you to see if you want to install the GitHub for Windows. So if you already have a Git bash and on your machine, so you can skip that. If not, you can actually say okay, get it installed. Once the installation is completed, you basically have three main components. You will have a Kitematic. We'll see later, not really necessary to discuss right now. An Oracle VM, where your Docker machine, the one that is actually animating the host, where the Docker engine will run and help you as a Docker host for you. And most importantly, you need to have the Docker Quick Start terminal. Okay, so you can launch it from the start menu or desktop, or you can go to that specific folder. And as we seen earlier, you all have a different set of access, at normal users, at one admin user. So we would prefer you to run this installation through admin user, and also this application through admin user. So I made this to run as admin always, or you can actually right click and say run as administrator. So this will actually launch the Quick Start terminal. So one point to note here, that's something that we see when you start, it'll actually do the basic necessary things for your machine, and it'll actually get machine IP address and stuff like that. So you will have a couple of steps running on your screen, the interactive shell. So wait for that to complete, and sometimes you may have to give an explicit OK, because especially when they try to get an IP address, it will ask you for some permission, and sometimes it will relay on your taskbar. So please take a look on your taskbar. If something is pending for an acceptance, please do accept, and it'll start something called default. We'll see what is that all about, okay, later, don't worry. So once your terminal is ready, you can actually start running Docker and take the sessions further. Also something that I want to be very specific, so especially when you use specific model of hardware, sometimes you will get despite of the fact that you disable everything, you enable the virtualization, you may still get something called a VirtualBox no VTX error. So you may your Docker machine reframe to start saying there's VTX is not ready. Okay, so don't worry, this is not an enterprise setup, so you can actually do Docker machine space default space stop, and you can actually create a new machine with VirtualBox-no VTS check and give a different name. So you can say new Docker machine 1 or something like that. Okay, so whatever name that you want to do. But there are chances that you may get some kind of error. We can actually look at, or you can comment below the post. We can actually see how we can manage it. But most of the things, it is most important that we enable the virtualization, we disable any other conflicting virtualization software running. All right, so we are all set with our Docker. And as again already said if you have another Docker which is running on Windows natively or Linux or whatever laptop or whatever machine that you have, or a cloud access, feel free, we can use that same thing. So the first thing that I'm gonna do again, I'm gonna do Docker version. It'll show you the client version, okay, and it'll also show you the server version and say it's a community version that we are running, and you can see the Git versions and stuff like that. There's something that we initially just touch upon called Docker machine. So as we are running on Docker, normally you see something called Docker engine, so we'll discuss a little later. But basically Docker machine is the tool that is actually orchestrating or managing the host where the Docker engine is running. Because when you run the Docker toolbox, you are actually creating another layer which is not directly sitting on your machine. So there is another tool which is called Docker machine, which is managing the host, the virtual machine, the virtual default host where the Docker engine is running. So if I do Docker machine -ls, it'll actually show you the name is default and there's an IP address. So make a note of this IP address. So we'll be using this IP address when we expose certain services on this Docker machine, and you can actually create your own Docker machine, and a lot of customization that is possible with different Docker machine command. So let's say if I do Docker machine, you can actually create, you have config, you can actually see the status, and you can start, stop, and check the upgrade. You can change the URLs, or you can actually restart the Docker machine if it gets stuck or not really starting, in the initial process. Or when you're not really want the Docker machine to be running and consume some resources, you can actually stop and keep it down and bring it back using Docker machine start, proper name of the machine, and then you can use accordingly. So just in case if you have multiple machine running, and if you really want to see the IP address, because this is important, most of the expose services will be using by default localhost if you have Docker running on your machine, but as it is running on the toolbox, we're going to use this specific IP addresses. And you'll also have, in case if you want to see, you can see the Docker config. Okay, that's pretty much that we want to discuss today around the Docker toolbox. Okay, and just to reiterate, so what we have done, so we have installed Docker toolbox because we want to use another way when not all the requirement is satisfied to have native way of Docker installation. So to do so, make sure that you enable your virtualization through BIOS, you disable any of the existing virtualization software, and you download and install, and that's it. It's okay. So thank you so much. We shall start rolling further with the Docker containers and then eventually Kubernetes in the upcoming sessions. Thanks so much. Stay tuned.